Enemy of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Sing hallelujah. Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe is on the aeroplane back home to London and to a reunification with her family. Hallelujah. But Julian Assange remains behind bars as the British High Court refuses him permission to appeal against the unjust decision to send him to America and 175 years of penal servitude for publishing entirely true material. I'm not making that up. The war drags on in the Ukraine. The Americans are ready to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, stuffing in more and more and more weaponry and entertaining the very possibility of World War III with what they phantasmically describe as a no-fly zone. But the Nazis are being crushed. The Azov battalion founder has been killed in Mariupol, and much of the country is now completely cleansed of the Nazi, fascist, ultra-nationalist forces of the Ukrainian army. And the whole prospect now of a negotiated settlement is hoving into view. President Zelensky, whilst on a worldwide circus tour by Zoom of other people's parliaments, where he's greeted with a standing ovation by the members, but never asked where he got all that money in his offshore bank account. I tell you, fasten your seatbelts, because for the next 3 hours, this really is going to be the mother of all talk shows extra.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows extra. If you're watching on Facebook, please share now with all of your contacts, all of your friends. If you're watching on my YouTube channel, please subscribe. If you're watching on Twitter and on Twitch, well, long may it continue. But should it not continue, you have to know this. You must follow me on my Telegram channel. That's where my Twitter output will go if it's no longer possible to have it on Twitter. It's t.me/George Galloway. And as for the mother of all talk shows, never mind the mother of all talk shows extra, if you want to be certain that you'll continue to be able to see this, and for the last 4 shows in a row, almost 1.2 million on average of you have watched all or part of the show. But should it come to pass that you can no longer get it on your usual channels, you need to subscribe to my Patreon channel. That's patreon.com/George Galloway. It would cost you £1 a week, but then that's the cost of a cup of tea in a transport cafe. Certainly nowhere near the price of a cup of tea in one of the high street cafes. So if you think I'm worth it, you're going to have to subscribe, because no one can tell in this atmosphere of witch hunt just exactly who and when is going to disappear. Ed Schultz, my late friend from RT America, is 4 years in the grave, God rest his soul. But a tweet was resurfaced from his long dormant Twitter account of something that he put out in 2018 before he died. And it was stamped Russian-affiliated media. And he's not even a dead Russian, not like Dostoevsky, not like Solzhenitsyn. He's not even an animated Russian like Sergei and Alexander and their little son Oleg. No, He's a dead American, a man that used to be a major figure in US television. He's 4 years dead, but they still are stamping him with the dreaded words. So you never know what's coming next. The magnificent Russian tennis player, Medvedev, has been told that he will not be able to play at Wimbledon this year unless he denounces his own government. Just think about that for a minute. And just thank your lucky stars that that was never applied to British and American sports stars and entertainers when Britain and America, in complete defiance of international law, killed 1 million people in the illegal invasion of Iraq. Just thank your lucky stars that no one thought of that one. I don't know what Medvedev will do. I know what I would do in his shoes, but there's a lot of money and prestige at stake at Wimbledon. If he does bow the knee, then the disgrace will be not on him, but on the Lawn Tennis Association and the British tennis authorities. And what will it be worth to have a man denounce his own country on pain of being drummed out of the sport that he loves and excels in? Advantage McCarthyism, the touchline judge might opine censorously. The whole idea of witch hunting people because they are Russians quite belies the absolute lie that the West, that's 10% of the human population, is not at war with Russians, only with their government. Well, Medvedev, the tennis player, sure ain't a part of the Russian government. But he's being witch hunted, he's being blackmailed, he's being browbeaten. Ditto Chelsea Football Club, who were told that they could not sell tickets to their own fans for the upcoming FA Cup tie with Middlesbrough. An absolute witch hunt is destroying a football team that is a world power in the game. The Champions League holders are being systematically deconstructed because their owner is, or rather was, a Russian. It's a double is or was, because Roman Abramovich, on the face of it, no longer owns Chelsea. And Roman Abramovich is no longer a Russian. But the supporters, hundreds of thousands of them, of Chelsea Football Club are being victimized by a set of football authorities that gave permission for the royal family of Saudi Arabia to take over another prime English Premiership football team, Newcastle United. This after they chopped the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi into pieces in their consulate in Istanbul and flushed him down the drain. This after, just 2 days ago, that same Saudi regime actually chopped the heads off 81 people in a single day. The biggest act of head chopping since ISIS. Oh, wait, even ISIS never cut 81 people's heads off on the same day, although they probably got near to that grisly record. And speaking of Saudi Arabia, who's there right now? The British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, seeking to take the high ground over Ukraine, is in Riyadh on his knees, kissing the ring of the Saudi crown prince who murdered Jamal Khashoggi, who gave the order to decapitate 81 people in a single day, many of them captured for protesting for democracy when they were teenagers. Boris Johnson's there kissing the ring, begging for more oil production from the Saudis. Joe Biden would be there if he could find his way to the airport. And I don't know, Nancy Pelosi, if she could stay off the gin for long enough, she'd be there too. But the Saudis actually won't take a telephone call from Joe Biden, who, of course, in his election campaign, promised to be really, really tough with them, to reset relations with Saudi Arabia, even though he's now by letter, because they won't take the telephone call, begging them to save America's economy by upping their production. Saudi Arabia has just announced that it will sell its oil in the Chinese currency, RMB, from now on. And that's why Vladimir Putin is right today when he says that this conflict in Ukraine has marked the end of the West's economic and political domination of the globe. Sing hallelujah to that, for it has gone on for far too long. Hundreds of years it's been going on. I'm on South African Broadcasting Corporation, their BBC, in a debate tomorrow. Although they couldn't find anyone to debate against me, they had to get a guy from New York. Why do you think South Africa, all of Africa, is against the NATO provocation towards Russia, the NATO encroachment upon Russia, which has been answered in this invasion of Ukraine? There's never been a Russian Congo or a Chinese Congo, but there was, I'm afraid to say, for hundreds of years, the bloodiest of all colonial outposts, the Belgian Congo, where the richest country in Africa was systematically looted of its people and of its treasure by King Leopold of the Belgians, long gone. But Belgium is where the headquarters of NATO and of the European Union currently is. And one of the things we'll be looking at tonight is what all of this means for Europe as a continent, for the EU as an economic and political bloc, and for the European economy. And it doesn't make happy reading, I must tell you. So we'll be looking at just exactly who is who in this whole affair. I've made my position very clear from the beginning. I did not expect this invasion. I did not want this invasion. But now that this invasion has happened, it's far better that it comes to a negotiated end as quickly as possible, like tomorrow. It is vital for the preservation of Ukraine's infrastructure and, above all, its innocent civilian population, that the forces of the coup regime in Kiev lay down their arms and negotiate a settlement which could have been had before the invasion began. A settlement which, as Lavrov put it, is a set of minimal demands, the foremost of which is the treaty proof that Ukraine will never join NATO, never invite foreign armies or weapons onto their soil ever again. That Ukraine should be a neutral country, like Austria. It's hardly a high price to pay to be like Austria, to be like Switzerland, to be a bridge between the West and Russia if anyone ever again wishes to cross it, rather than a trench in which NATO can buckle down for the invasion of Russia at some time in the future. For those who say, what a fanciful idea, well, not if you're Russian. Russia was invaded through exactly that European plain, through Ukraine, by Napoleon, by the Kaiser, and again by Adolf Hitler. 3 invasions from the West through Ukraine. They will never allow another one. As I put it to you, and it's chilling, but true, the Russians would rather blow up the whole world than leave themselves naked and open to a 4th Western invasion of their country. Now, I'm not a supporter of Vladimir Putin. I've said many times that if I was a Russian, I would have voted for someone else. I would have voted for the main opposition leader, Zhuganov. He's a communist. Not many people of you knew that the second biggest party in Russia is the Communist Party. And they issued a statement this week, which in its clarity and its luminosity was the best thing I've read so far from Russia on how this disaster in Ukraine came about. I urge you to read it. You'll find it on my Twitter feed. It's a first-class look at the history and present-day reality of Ukraine. It makes for startling reading, not least in this regard. And these are the issues I wish to close on. It doesn't matter how many times you show people the swastikas, you show them the goose-stepping Nazi filth in Ukraine, you show them the SS insignia, you show them Stepan Bandera's avenue in Kiev, you show them the IKEA built by a flat pack, built by the main Nazi leader in Sweden. The store is in Bandera Avenue in Kiev. You show them the city council of Kiev singing a song, a hymn of praise to Stepan Bandera. You saw a tweet this day from the Ukrainian ambassador in Germany, of all places, from Berlin, saying that he had been briefing the Ukrainian people living in Berlin and then laid flowers on the grave, and I quote, of our hero Stepan Bandera. Who was Stepan Bandera? If you don't know by now, you need to know this. Babi Yar. You need to know that Bandera and his gang of Jew killers massacred thousands of Jews, not far from that television tower that the Russians blew up in the center of Kiev early in the war. They took thousands of Jews to Babi Yar and they massacred them. And the Ukraine ambassador laid flowers on his grave today. Bandera didn't just collaborate with the Nazis. That's the least of it. He was a Nazi. He was a Ukrainian Nazi. He's responsible for the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Jews and non-Jews from Poland and Ukraine. Think about that. You know, my two grandfathers fought in the British Army, the 8th Army, the Highland Division, under General later Field Marshal Montgomery. They fought and killed Nazis. Not so that a British government would later arm and fund and propagandize for Nazis in Ukraine. They didn't go on to fight in Monte Cassino, one of the worst battles of the entire Second World War, at least on the Western Front. And in one case, never recover from it. They didn't fight Nazis in 1944 in Italy and in North Africa so that our country could become a funder and armor and propagandizer for Nazis in the Ukraine. Has everybody forgotten the Second World War? Does nobody care about the Second World War? Tell your old parents, tell your grandparents, go to their graves and tell them there, you don't care about the Second World War. You don't care about the massacre of Jews. You stand with Ukraine, with your twibbons and your fundraising and your proof of support for Ukraine must be shown before you can enter this restaurant. You go and tell them that. Tell your conscience that. Well, me, I'll never forget fascism in Europe in the 1930s and in the 1940s. I'll never forget it. And I'll never forget who defeated it. Us, first and foremost, when we stood alone, when America was watching the war on newsreel, weighing up which side to join. And second and preeminently and overwhelmingly, the heroes of the Red Army of the USSR and the partisans in Ukraine and everywhere in occupied parts of the then Soviet Union. The siege of Leningrad, the Battle of Stalingrad, the killer blow at Kursk, the battle for Berlin. I will never forget it. Don't ask me to. It might be something to do with my age and my class, but I will never support fascists. And so, whilst I hope for an early, speedy, negotiated end to this conflict in Ukraine, the power to achieve that lies with the clown Zelensky. All he has to say is that Ukraine will henceforth be a neutral country. There'll be no NATO training bases, no NATO weapons, and never NATO membership. And we will never again bombard the people of Donetsk and Lugansk. We will never again threaten and cut off the water from the people of the Crimean Peninsula. We will never again allow ourselves to be a spear against Russia. As I say, I'm not with Putin, but I am with Russia. I always have been, and I always will be. It is a people, a civilization, a highly cultured and developed and civilized civilization, unlike some others I could mention. It's the biggest country in the world with 11 time zones. It's the biggest country in Europe, although Google has now exiled it to Asia. Can you believe it? Moscow is the biggest city in Europe. It deserves respect. It deserves its concerns to be taken seriously. It deserves to be a part of the international community, which, I repeat, is not the Western periphery, where only 3% of the world's children live. 3%. The international community is 100%. The vast majority of it wants nothing to do with NATO and its provocations and its aggression against the great people of Russia. Just think about all of that. I'll take your calls throughout the show where you can argue the toss with me. You're most welcome. And we'll be hearing from some terrific guests, some of whom you haven't seen before on the show. But once seen, you'll never forget them. Fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
I can't believe I'm reading this. We've got new subscribers in Martinique, Fiji, Cambodia, Mauritius, and Georgia. That's not Georgia, USA, but Georgia in the Caucasus. And that means we now have subscribers in 130 countries. And we've been in the political top 10 in Russia, South Africa, Singapore, and the Philippines. And this actually is because our Maxwell the Monster podcast was released on all of our podcast platforms. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. You can listen to Moats anytime, anywhere. And leave us, by the way, a 5-star review if you would. Here's one. I listen in from Saudi Arabia and play your podcast on the commute to and from daycare. Not sure what my 2-year-old gets out of it, but I certainly enjoy your perspective and the diversity of guests you have on. Thanks, Gigi. Thanks to you and to your 2-year-old.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
Here's the first poll of the evening. Should the UK have paid Iran the £400 million they owed it 6 years ago to free Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe? A, yes. B, no. Here's the phone numbers. I'm sure you'll want to be in touch. They may be on the screen, but it's in the UK, entirely free, remember. 08 081 96 5522. That's 08 081 96 5522. If you're in the US, it's also toll-free, completely free. +1 844 944 3344. And here's some social media. Nahid Al-Ali makes a very good point. Iranians should include Assange in this deal. Also, the amount of the money should be multiplied, as it's frozen from the 1970s. And Patrick Keelty says, please make it clear it's not a ransom. We owe it, verified by international courts. Yes, we pay who we owe. Simple. Let's hope we can have basic dialogue. It's a start. Steve Lee says, I'm glad she's home. Entirely possible. This is a completely baseless and foul accusation that is made by Steve Lee. I ask everyone to delete it. It falsely claims that Nazanin was a spy. This is completely denied by her and her family. And I don't want this baseless accusation left unchallenged. Maritime says, I would sit in an Iranian jail for 6 years for 400 million. But she's not getting the 400 million. It's going to Iran, to whom we owe it. James McCluskey says, a debt that needs repaying, but using innocent civilians as hostages is extreme. Well, I'm not sure that's entirely supportable. VOB says we should have given it back to them in the 70s when we originally stole it. But it was made clear 6 years ago that they wanted the money in return for her release. So that was the least the government could have done. And 007 says, trick question. If Iran kidnapped a random UK citizen without cause and demanded 400 million, the UK should tell them to get stuffed. If Iran kidnaps a UK citizen to remind the world that the UK previously stole 400 million pounds, then that's a different matter entirely. Tragic that it came to this. Now, who's my next guest? It's Danny Haiphong, the one and only, an absolute internet sensation in the United States, a specialist in China-US relations, and an expert talker too. Danny, thanks very much for joining us for your first time, but I hope not the last on the mother of all talk shows. Let me ask you something kind of, it's a slight diversion just for a minute, but it's something that's important to me and I'm sure to you. I have an Asian wife and 3 Asian children. I've been horrified by the pictures I've seen, the spike of murderous violence against Asian people in America, not just politically related, but COVID related, people pushing people under trains and stabbing them and beating them in the streets. Has that abated somewhat, or is it still a real crisis?
Oh no, it is still a real crisis. In New York City alone, we've had a number of these attacks, even within the last month, to the point where in Chinatown, you see long lines of Chinese women and women of Asian descent looking to pick up pepper spray. There is a feeling that the United States just is not safe for people of the diaspora anymore, of the Southeast Asian diaspora, those of Chinese descent or otherwise. And this all stems, as you said, so poignantly from the fact that China has been scapegoated for COVID-19, and both political parties have stoked this anti-China propaganda around COVID-19, blaming China for the virus, even making up claims about there being a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I mean, all of this has really sowed into the minds of Americans that Chinese people are their enemies, and anyone that quote unquote looks Chinese, right? I mean, that is how debased this has come. But of course, this has more than a century long history, more than a century and a half long history in the United States, where China has been viewed as this quote unquote yellow peril. And that is all about attempting to meet the geopolitical and imperialist ambitions of the United States and using essentially the Chinese as cannon fodder. And it's even more ridiculous in this age where we have a rising China, and more people, especially from that region, are thinking that the United States is actually the one in decline. And this spike in anti-Asian racism appears to be a big part of that.
Who's doing it? We know who teed it up, but who's carrying out these attacks?
Unfortunately, it's ordinary people. It's ordinary people on the streets of cities like New York, right? It's people who are so frustrated, so uh, really keen on looking for someone to blame for their own predicament, right? Because a lot of this has to do also with the economic situation in the United States and how racial tensions are inflamed when you have just this prolonged economic crisis, that it was supposedly COVID related, but we found out that actually the United States was on the verge of an economic collapse prior to COVID-19 being recognized on US shores. And so the increasing poverty levels, the increasing homelessness, the mental health crises, combine that with this daily and endless propaganda coming from the US mainstream media, fear mongering about China and everything from quote unquote human rights all the way into COVID-19. And you have this perfect storm, this disaster of ceaseless and needless violence against people of Asian descent. It truly is a real stain and impediment to what we really need in the United States, which is a class war.
Well, the United States economy was on the verge of collapse before COVID-19 and long before the invasion of Ukraine, though all economic problems were first attributed to COVID-19 and now are being attributed because COVID no longer exists, can no longer be funded because all the funds are going into military hardware. And of course, it's now being blamed on Vladimir Putin. It's him that's putting the gas prices up in the United States. Although incidentally, just a stone's throw from El Paso in Texas, just over the border in Mexico, you can still buy a gallon of petrol for $3, half the price in the United States. So something doesn't quite add up on that. But this searching around for scapegoats doesn't disguise the fundamental problem that the United States society and economy are in fundamental decline.
No, it does not. And we even saw that in the recent talks that Yang Jiechi, the top diplomat of China, and Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor of the United States, had, where Jake Sullivan comes into that meeting, similar to Anchorage, Alaska, March 2021. He comes into the meeting already brandishing threats toward China, right? All of this bluster about how China is supporting Russia through sanctions and something will be done about that, and making up rumors out of whole cloth that China is supplying Russia with military weaponry to essentially invade Ukraine, right? All of these baseless accusations, all to attempt to build up this atmosphere of war going into diplomatic talks, because the United States understands, I think, that it is not in a position to really scale down its military offensive around the world, its endless wars around the world. And it certainly doesn't have much of an interest, given how profits are booming for military contractors, U.S. military contractors like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, due to this war, due to the fact that Ukraine has been pumped with billions of NATO weapons over the past 7 years since the coup, and that this escalation has only served their interests. And so you have a lot of different sides talking out of different ends of their mouths, but at the end of the day, what it all amounts to is that the United States only really has one trajectory and direction that it can go in. It cannot arrest these forces in the military industrial complex. It cannot arrest these big banks. What they want is to scale up and maximize their profits at the expense of everyone else, and they will justify it by any means necessary. And that means blaming Vladimir Putin when essentially it's the fossil fuel corporations and the weapons contractors that are driving this crisis, or whether it's blaming China, which has been the only major power willing to actually broker a peace agreement from the outside, right? To be a good faith third party actor in this conflict. China has been the only one of the major countries to do that. And so it's pretty clear who the real warmongers are, who the real warmonger is, and that's the United States and its allies.
By the way, more than 80 members of the United States Congress are significant shareholders in those very arms corporations that you have just cited. There's not many countries where that would pass without much comment, I must tell you, but it appears to in the United States. Speaking of Congress, I thought Joe Biden was bad, but I saw video this week of Nancy Pelosi. And I've got to ask you, is the face and mind and voices of these two individuals not almost Shakespearean? How emblematic it is of decline.
It's so very true. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's, it was like a couple of minute diatribe commenting on the Russia-Ukraine situation, not really understanding, I think, what she's actually talking about. She claims she's not a military strategist, but is just throwing around no-fly zone, throwing around anti-aircraft missile carriers, et cetera, and just not really having any insight into the watershed moment that is occurring in the region that the United States is really at the forefront of creating, right? Really provoking Russia to take care of business because of how the US and NATO, through its meddling and outright political manipulation and maneuvering in Ukraine, has created this crisis. And so, yeah, Nancy Pelosi, she's a 100 millionaire. She is a product of these weapons manufacturers, these Silicon Valley corporations and big tech companies and Wall Street. And she has only become richer and richer in Congress, and therefore more and more detached from the actual reality of working people everywhere, that she cannot but help stumble over her words after really putting and helping put the United States into what is a disastrous situation, right? Provoking Russia into this intervention, which now has shockwaves throughout the world capitalist economy. It's not necessarily the pretty picture, I think, that the militarists, the bankers, and the capitalists all had for the end game with Russia and, by extension, China, right? This is a potential disaster, and even she doesn't really know what she's talking about, but the military strategist who she claims does, they know that something like a no-fly zone, something like a direct confrontation with Russia would spell really doom for the overall global political and economic system of capitalism that she supposedly presides over. But it's unclear how effectively she does at this point, given just her state of mind.
Exactly. I'm told she's better before lunch, if you get my meaning. Now, you mentioned earlier how the sun is risen in the east, that much even a blind man could see. But it didn't have to be a zero-sum game, did it? We could have had two suns if the West had decided to cooperate, to get alongside China and the rest of Asia, to cooperate with them mutually beneficially. We didn't have to have this zero-sum game, is my point.
Yes, and Russia and China both have, for the longest period, right? Ever since this new Cold War really jumped off with Barack Obama's pivot to Asia in the latter half of his first term, both Russia and China were clamoring really for normalized relations and to ensure that cooperation on the economic, political, and even military fronts was maintained. And of course, what the United States has done since 2012, over this last decade, has continued to provoke, antagonize, and ultimately surround militarily and create a real conflict between both of these countries. And so while I do not think that Russia and China's strategic partnership is necessarily just a byproduct of U.S. aggression, I do think that there are many good reasons, shared geographic space, lots of interchangeability and interdependency that can be built between Russia and China. Russia, a big energy powerhouse, and China, a big manufacturing and tech powerhouse. There's a lot of commonalities and interests culturally, economically, that these two countries share. But at the end of the day, it is also true that the United States' aggression has actually facilitated, I think, an acceleration of this multipolar world that Russia and China, through their partnership, are spearheading. This idea that unipolarity, the US's hegemony just being the dictator of global affairs, is outdated and deserves to be revised so that more countries, more nations, more poles can arise around the world and have a say, really democratize how world affairs are governed. And that's what Russia and China are trying to do. And even up into this Russia-Ukraine conflict, they've been doing a very good job. They have upheld the UN Charter. They have formed incredible alliances economically, these economic integration plans like the Belt and Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union. There is a move to lessen reliance on the dollar, the US dollar. There are just all of these incredible developments in infrastructure that are being made in this region, and it is having ripple effects in Latin America and Africa as China especially, but even Russia, are developing stronger and stronger ties with the global south and really connecting what used to be considered the underdeveloped wretched of the earth, as Fanon called them, the colonized world, really spearheading this new phase of development, of growth, of self-determination and independence that threatens, and I think already has, isolated the United States in a lot of ways, which is why it cannot but damage itself and its European allies economically by antagonizing and continuing to try to prolong this Russia-Ukraine conflict, especially with these sanctions, which are so counterproductive.
Well, we'll be turning to the European allies, as you put it, vassals, one might otherwise say, later in the show. How can people follow your work, Danny?
Sure. So you can find me at Black Agenda Report each week. You can also find me on Substack at chroniclesofhaiphong.substack.com. And you can find my YouTube show at The Left Lens. You can subscribe there on YouTube. And you can support my work at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong, and follow me on Twitter at Spirit of Ho, Spirit of H-O, like Ho Chi Minh.
Fantastic. God bless you. God bless your work. Thanks very much, Danny, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. How's the poll going? Can I see the... should the UK have paid Iran the money 6 years ago? Yes, 68%. No, surprisingly high, 32%. But on YouTube, it's yes, 66, no, 34. And on Telegram, yes, 74, no, 26th. The smartest people are always voting on Telegram. Keep voting. I think this is on for the whole of the show. Yeah. Let's go with the first call. Tony in Yorkshire. Go ahead, Tony.
Hiya, George. I want to ask you a question and put you on the spot, and you're probably going to have a go at me because I think I'm going mad because most people think I am. So here's the question. I'll make it quick. Right. Why is it that when Russian bombs from Russian planes are dropped on Ukraine, which is horrific because nobody wants to see innocent people die, we in the West put up £350 per household for people, but in the instance of Yemen or Palestine, and especially in Yemen, when we use British fighter planes with British bombs with Saudi pilots, that we spent 6.7 billion making the money out of them, raining bombs on Yemen, there's no money. And there's no money for those poor people over the last 5 years. I can't get my head around it. And when I ask this question to other people, everybody looks at me as if it's me that's deranged.
No, it's them that's deranged. It's them that have been stupefied by the mainstream media and the political class, because the paradox that you describe is an absolute paradox. Not only are we not in the Ukraine war, on the face of it, but we are in the Yemen war. We are direct participants. And to call it a war is, of course, a misnomer because it is the richest, most powerful country in the Arab world, destroying the poorest and most defenseless people in the Arab world, their next door neighbor. You talk about Russia and Ukraine. How about Saudi Arabia and Yemen? They are not only next door,
George,
they are actually the same people. Yeah, go on.
Two last points before I go, right? And I agree with everything you said. Here's the hypocrisy of it. We've banned oil from Russia, but we're now buying from Saudi Arabia, who's probably buying the oil off Russia. And we've got a farcical situation where Boris Johnson has gone to Saudi Arabia to buy oil of people that beheaded 81 people on Saturday. 81 people. If anybody thinks I'm exaggerating it, they can check it on Google, right? The facts are out there. And here's the second thing. My football team, who I love dearly, is owned by a Saudi Arabian owner, Sheffield United. Yet they're sanctioned
not just the Saudi Arabian, Tony.
It's embarrassing.
Tony.
I'm aware of the Bin Laden family. I'm aware.
No, he's from the family, just like Newcastle United's owner.
Yeah.
Tony, that is a brilliant call. I don't know why you thought I was going to fall out with you. That was absolutely brilliant. Have we got any other callers? Let me see. Amin is in Canada. Amin, welcome. Amin, are you there? Ground control to Major Tom is gone. Let me get some more social media up then. This is rock and roll, this. Kleis van de Waal. I don't like war, but in this case, Russia had no other choice. Along with his border of nearly 5,000 kilometers with Ukraine, you don't want nuclear arms next to it. I'm not always agreeing with Putin, but in this case, yes, he's right. 14,000 people were killed in Donbass, but nothing on TV here in Holland. CJ says George is right. It's like all the people who fought and the innocent who died in World War II got slapped in the face again. And Arif says the West have not reported about the Ukrainian journalists demanding the final solution and the murder of Russian children. Kevin Roddy says Putin already stated his case clearly by saying that Ukraine must be denazified and demilitarized. Ukrainians already had NATO bases, calling them missions, and they already had biological WMD. Quite right. And DJ says, has Z cars been removed from the TV yet? You've lost me on that. Was Z cars written by a Russian? And Purple Grapes says, Danny Haiphong, Gigi is bringing all the great people to his show. And Nora Dean says, if the Saudis are going to dump the dollar and accept RMB for oil, the US empire will attack. Yeah, look out for heightened awareness in Western media of the atrocious human rights record of the government in Saudi Arabia, which just decided to help wreck the dollar hegemony. Trust me on that. And Jay says, being Asian myself, I'm perplexed by how easily suggestible the American psyche is when it comes to processing of information they get from the obviously biased politicians and media. Indeed so, Jay. And Michael Casey says, how can we respect Russia, a state who lies and jails its people for speaking their minds? That's Michael, who's never heard of Julian Assange. Can I squeeze in Amin in Canada? Amin, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very clearly. Go ahead, sir.
How are you? First of all, salam alaikum, Lord.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah barakatuh. Go ahead.
Habibna, our beloved.
Thank you.
You need to be well preserved. We need your information, and you're educating a generation if you are not aware of that. Generations, actually. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
This level of, or heightened degree of demonization of the other, since of Russia specifically, since World War II, I guess, post World War II. There's a Cold War that's been going on, and Russia hasn't really left its area per se, nor intervened by that definition anywhere, unlike the Western powers, the EU and the American entities.
Quite so. Yeah.
But the state of affairs now, I've never, ever, ever seen this. And this heightened intensity is a little too much to bear because, and the double standards, the blatant hypocrisy that Putin has brought out and exposed by, first of all, his natural right, Russia's natural right, just him, sorry. And people demonize Russia. It's unwarranted. It's unfounded. I mean, hate. We're using the word hate, okay?
Yeah.
This is absurd, deep-rooted hate in the media that's being propagated and really instilled in people's nervous system, and the attack of, the average Russians throughout the world. I mean, many reports throughout the world, especially in the West. It's absurd.
It's amazing, to hear the Prime Minister of Canada talking about how he is going to be in the vanguard of fighting back for liberty and democracy, when just a couple of weeks ago, he actually froze the bank accounts of people protesting on the streets of Canada and actually started to witch hunt those that sent them donations in the post. He took away their employment. He deprived them of the means of living, even took away their pets if they were away in Quebec, in Ottawa, for the demonstration. A man less likely to imagine as a champion of liberty, it's difficult to come up with. Trudeau is probably the biggest hypocrite of them all.
And they get away with it. Never being held to account, and where no one is allowed to hold anyone in the West to account. These politicians, these individuals, they got impunity. They get immunity. What do you call it? Legal cover.
Immunity, impunity, both of them.
It's absurd.
Well, look, I just followed earlier this evening something called the Liberty Alliance. It's just been set up here in London, but it intends to stretch across the ocean to North America and beyond, but North America and Britain for starters. We need to rally everyone that believes in freedom of speech, that knows that freedom of speech is foundational for democracy. Without freedom of speech, you cannot have democracy. And to recover such liberties as we have undoubtedly lost over the last two and a half years. Check it out, on Twitter, Liberty
2.5 weeks
Alliance.
Or a week. The amount of information that's being silenced.
Thank you very, very much. Give me some more social media, please. Joe in Lancashire, our country is now crippled due to sanctions applied on Russia. We are paying the price for Boris prostituting our economy to please the USA. The whole situation in Ukraine is a soap opera by the West to smash Russia and its people. For the love of God, George, keep the siren going. You're our only hope. Thank you for that. The hypocrisy, lies, and dodgy deals done in our name are only being highlighted by you. Well, not only me, but I've definitely got the biggest audience for it. We've got David in Finland. Let's go there. Haven't been to Finland for a while. Go ahead, David.
Hello, George. Good evening.
Nice to hear from you again.
Yes, well, it's the first time I've actually got through to you. I was born in Northern Ireland, and I moved to Finland quite recently. I have a couple of points, but I have one question. RT News have just reported that more than a third of Americans are willing to risk nuclear war over Ukraine. Now, this was a research poll that was published only yesterday, where both Democrats and Republicans are now willing to risk nuclear annihilation over Ukraine. I don't know if you've seen that.
I did. You couldn't make it up, David, really. It can only be that they have no idea what nuclear annihilation might look and feel like.
Yes. And tell me this, we've just seen there very, very recently as well this evening that Joe Biden has sent a further $800 million worth of weapons. And so that's a total of $1 billion. Now, as you know, I've been following this very, very closely, especially on the Russian TV and the military operations, because they're very transparent about what's going on. Now, if we go by this, we see that they have Kiev surrounded. Now, tell me this, how are they firstly getting the weapons into Ukraine in this situation, for example? And secondly, if America is, trying to sell itself as a democratic country in the West, lead by example, as we should say, what kind of example is this to be sending to the next generation of youth? And is this probable that we're heading...
I think that's, David, that's brilliantly put. I wish we could talk for longer, but it's coming up to the hour. But the answer to your question is it's coming through Poland. And I don't speak for Russia. I don't know their mind. But I know if I was the leader of Russia, I would attack these weapon supplies the minute they crossed over the Ukrainian border. That would be a very simple thing to do. It would waste another $800 million of Joe Biden's taxpayers' dollars. I would not allow these weapons to fall into the hands of people who are very obviously fighting a losing battle. Apart from anything else, all these weapons are going to end up in the hands of Russia and probably be given to the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic armed forces because the Ukrainian army is beaten. If the Russians were prosecuting war like we prosecute war, then the war would all be over and Kiev would be a smoking ruin, like Baghdad, like Baghdad was not even 20 years ago. We would lay it waste. We would lay every major city and town in the Ukraine waste. But Russia's not doing that. And of course, that's why there's a shortage of news footage. That's why they have to use false pictures from other countries, other wars, some of them bomb damage caused by us and by our allies. So Russia is seeking to stick to military and strategic targets. Of course, in any war, civilians are going to be harmed, killed, maimed. That's why I want the war to end. But I'll say this finally, if I may. If you think the war in Ukraine started 17 or 18 days ago, I really don't have anything more to say to you, because I've been watching the war in Ukraine, which began 8 years and 14,000 dead civilians ago. Well, I've got to take a break. There's no news tonight, but there's a 5-minute break, just so I can wet my whistle. I'll see you in the second hour.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Well, if you thought Danny Haiphong was a cool name, what about Niko House? He's coming up in just a minute. Should the UK have paid Iran the £400 million that we have owed Iran since the 1970s? Should we have paid it 6 years ago to free Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe? A, yes, 69%. B, no, 31% on Twitter. On YouTube, yes, 67, no, 33. And on Telegram, yes, 74, no, 26. 3,200 people have voted in the first hour. You can vote right up to the end of the show. A reminder of the phone numbers again. If you're in the UK, it's entirely free to call the show, 08081 965522. And if you're in the US or Canada, it's also entirely free, toll free, +1 844 944 3344. Now, Niko House is a former colleague of mine at RT. He's closed down. I'm closed down. We're both out of work, although he is an extraordinary vlogger. He has a huge audience in the United States, and I wanted to talk to him about what the buzz is on the streets of America about this absolute crisis, including the possible danger of nuclear war in America. Niko House, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Very good to see you, bro. Thanks for joining us. Let me ask you a question I asked Danny Haiphong. I saw Joe Biden so many times and I cringe, but I saw Nancy Pelosi this week, and she makes Joe Biden look like Cicero, look like Aristotle. How did America come to be led by two such people?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think we have to. Well, first of all, thank you for the wonderful introduction. You're too kind. I've been a big fan of the show for a while, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks.
But I think that we have to come to grips in the United States and accept the fact that our democracy is not in the hands of the people, but instead in the hands of the oligarchy. I'm one of those people who preaches when everybody was saying, well, Joe Biden won legitimately, or Donald Trump got cheated, or whatever. I could care less about either of those things.
Niko, I can no longer hear you, I'm afraid. So let me go back to some social media. Let's take it.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, I've got so much social media, I won't get through it all, but I promise I will read it all. My eye was caught by Ray Jones, who says George Galloway, perhaps, as the next leader of the Conservative Party. I assume he means that as an insult, but in any case, I'm already spoken for. I'm the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. Check them out. And Marty says, George sounding like Farage at the moment. You see, you are typical, Marty, of the cowards that I referred to earlier. Instead of writing that kind of thing, why not call me? If you're in Britain, 08081965522, or are you a gutless coward, a keyboard warrior? If you're not a gutless coward, pick up the phone now, 08081965522. Go on, I dare you.
The thing I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that you stated at the top of the show that it was most likely dinghy refugees that had bombed Liverpool today.
I said nothing of the kind. You did, really? Actually. I said nothing of the kind. Neither you nor I. I said nothing. Stop. I said nothing of the kind. Nothing of the kind. Now, if you want to carry on, carry on. But I said nothing of the kind. You need to listen to it again.
I have listened to it 2 or 3 times because I was so bloody angry at the first one. I thought I'd better listen to that again.
Tell me what I said. Tell me what I said.
That you're after the Tory vote, the ex-Tory vote. I appreciate that.
How dare you? How dare you? Get this woman off the line. I'll tell you what I am desperate about, madam. I'm desperately angry that pregnant women, new mothers in a Liverpool hospital were almost torn to pieces by terrorist explosions. That's what I'm desperate about. I'm not interested in former Tory vote. Why don't you get this foolish paradigm out of your mind?
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Before I was rudely interrupted, I was talking to ace broadcaster in America, Niko House. It turns out that there was a network disruption, whether a natural occurrence or something else. I'll leave you to ponder. Niko, I just got from you that whether Biden was the legitimate winner or Trump was robbed, you don't really care. The real problem for American democracy is that we'll never know. And that was, I think, a very profound observation. Develop it, please.
Yeah, we'll never know, right? You have to, when all you have, we have some proprietary software that the average person, even government officials, can't just get access to automatically to verify audits. You have a situation like in South Florida with Tim Canova when he was up running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, where she literally destroyed ballots after being subpoenaed by a federal judge with really no type of penalty to go to her or Brenda Snipes, really, after she was the one who was found guilty of it. Like, how can we be certain that those people in such high-level positions are actually representative of what we're doing? And when they're not representative of what we're doing, it's because we can't vote them out or vote them in with any type of certainty or confidence, which means they can't be held accountable. And when you can't be held accountable, that's how you end up with situations like right now with the Ukraine-Russia scandal, where the U.S. seems to be seems to be involved, not only obviously now, but from 2014 at least. And if you really want to go deep, we can talk about during World War II, how long the United States has been involved in caping for Nazis in the Ukraine. So when you can't be held accountable, you can do stuff like this comfortably and not worried about any retaliation from the public.
I think that's a brilliant observation and one worth everyone reflecting on. But here's another one. In a way, it doesn't matter because they're both two cheeks of the same ass. The Democrats and the Republicans, you couldn't slip sixpence between them, certainly on foreign policy and increasingly on domestic policy also. It really is two sides of the same coin, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Domestic policy. I mean, for all intents and purposes, George, I'm not sure if you know, but we actually got more money in aid during the pandemic from the Trump administration than we've even had offered to us by the Democrats. And the little bit that was offered to us by the Democrats, they actually took back in tax returns. So we really can't tell the difference. And it's actually getting to such a degree that the Democrats are in direct opposition to liberty on all fronts. And of course, Republicans pretend like they're all about liberty as well. But that's really like, I don't really believe you guys either, because you still got your Marco Rubios, you still got your Ted Cruzes, and they sound just as bad as the Joe Bidens or the Nancy Pelosi's. But I will say the only good thing that's coming out of all of this is that there are leftists and conservatives on both sides. A lot of them are referred to themselves as populists on either side that are coming together and coalescing on the important issues such as foreign policy, such as me personally, I'm anti-mandate. It affected the Black community specifically in ways that didn't make any sense nor seem necessary. But those important humanistic issues we're coming together on, and you're starting to see the narrative shift, which in my opinion has to be the primary focus before we can start worrying about the politics of it all.
I agree with that. Labour, Conservative, Democrat, Republican. What we need is a liberty alliance that will try to recover the liberties that have been stolen from us. To defend free speech against governments and big tech. Because without these two things, we actually don't have a democracy. If you think about it, if you don't have free speech, you don't have democracy, literally. And we are now in an era where free speech is not just under attack, it is virtually being murdered in plain sight. Julian Assange, yesterday, lost his appeal against the extradition order to disappear in a dungeon for 175 years in the United States. You and I, and one or two others, are about the only big figures left standing on the internet. People are being eliminated ruthlessly, one by one by one.
Yeah. Oh, man. We saw what happened with RT America. You know, RT, he is still like producing shows and all that good stuff, but obviously nowhere near the impact that they would have and by the way, they never actually cite what RT actually is lied about. They always claim it's Russian propaganda, but as you know full and well, we have conservatives and leftists all over RT and RT America and the subsidiaries. There's parody on every single show. Even if you don't like what you hear. I mean, on RT, I might hear a liberal say something I do not like, just like I might hear a conservative say something I do not like. But that discourse is important for us to get down and really figure out what the problems are so we can offer valid solutions. But when you're able to attack an entire network to the point where one subsidiary is forced to close entirely, and you don't even have to provide any iota of proof of a single lie, then you're trudging into dangerous territory. And you cannot have liberty without free speech. Let's look at this Russia-Ukraine issue. If you even bring up the fact that the Azov Battalion was rewarded, which is a Nazi regiment, a Nazi battalion, it was initially a militia, it was rewarded for helping the United States successfully overthrow the Ukrainian government by being rolled into the official Ukrainian government. If you bring that up and people will tell you, oh, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, that's Russian propaganda. It was well documented. It's been talked about for years. We've been funding Nazism for years. But that story is harder to tell now because of all the subsidiaries that got taken down, people like you or me who are being either shadow banned from social media, whether it be Twitter, YouTube, whatever, and then people, organizations like RT being taken down, not for lying, because they never point out a lie. They never, as far as straight reporting is concerned, they never, and you will never be able to point a lie from RT. But what you will be able to find are a lot of honest journalists who got tired of being demanded to lie for mainstream media organizations that they may have used to work at. That's what you will find a lot of.
Of course, it would be something if you were not allowed to be a liar on television. If that were the case, then everyone from Rachel Maddow to most of the Fox News hosts and all the others, CNN in its totality, would be off the air because Trump was right about some things. Even a stop clock is right twice a day. But when Trump said these people were fake news, he was right about that.
He was right. Yeah, he was right. And it's funny because so here in the States, Trump co-opted that term because we were saying that about the liberal media and really Fox News at the time in the Bernie camp at the time, because they were always lying about Bernie Sanders for obvious reasons at the time. But no, you're 100% right. And it's funny to me because I'm old enough to remember, George, that if you went on YouTube and even if you said the word Nazi, let alone tried to praise them or carry water for them, you would have been removed immediately. But now you have people going on Rachel Maddow, literally trying to carry water for Hitler, saying, Hitler wasn't even as bad as Putin is, based on lies. And if Rachel Maddow, if that was your George, I think you would agree, we would be canceled. Our shows would be removed. We would be banned.
Exactly.
But Rachel Maddow would still be collecting a paycheck.
They said on Maddow and then tweeted it, now deleted, that Hitler didn't use chemical weapons, which means that 6 million ethnic Germans, meaning A, German Jews were not Germans, which is what Hitler said, of course. And B, it means that 6 million people were not gassed with chemical weapons. Chemical weapons. That's what Rachel Maddow said, or McFall said on her show. And then she tweeted it without attribution, i.e. assuming ownership of it. She's not been taken off the air.
Somebody sat down in a production meeting and was like, yep, that's the clip. Let's go ahead and put it on social media. They went back, looked at it and said, this is what we need to post. That's ridiculous. Somebody needs to be held accountable, but they won't be, right? Because they get paid to lie. They get paid to smear. And that's, and like you said, there are only a few of us standing because where they may not take you off explicitly, they'll just demonetize you. They'll shadow ban you. They'll make it almost impossible for you to grow a business independently because they saw that, I would say, maybe the rise of Trump in some instances, the rise of the Bernie Sanders movement, Tulsi Gabbard coming onto the scene, Hillary Clinton getting exposed, Biden being exposed. A lot of this stuff is because of independent journalists like you and I who are dedicated to nothing but the truth. And wherever that truth may fall, like I congratulated Trump and said he deserved the Nobel Peace Prize for what he did with North and South Korea. That had never been done, nor did we think it would happen in our lifetimes. And yet he was able to put his pride to the side and get that done. Whereas in the reverse, you had Hillary Clinton about to start World War III with North Korea, right? That's something that they don't like, is honesty, regardless of where that honesty and truth takes you. And as long as we keep allowing that as a population, not only over the pond where you're at, but here in the States, we're going to still see them try to normalize Nazis and pretend like it's not happening. Pretend as if they care about they call, white, Christian, blue-eyed, blonde-haired refugees from Ukraine. Those are political refugees. But if they're Mexican, if they're Honduran, if they're Somalian or African, well, those are illegals. As long as we keep allowing that binary thought process, that false paradigm of thinking and the suppression of speech, we're going to keep finding ourselves back in this exact same position.
Brilliantly put. Now, you mentioned Tulsi. I thought that she was outstanding for a time during the Russiagate affair. Then she dropped off my radar anyway. But now she's back, and she's being accused by Mitt Romney of being a traitor, literally guilty of treason. Tell the viewers about that, will you?
I find it funny because all she's done is say we should be striving for peace. And she's giving context to the situation between Russia and Ukraine that's very necessary. But also, I remember a time where several Democrats and FBI agents, not named perhaps Andrew McCabe and James Comey and some others, colluded to frame the president of the United States for treason, which, last I checked, in and of itself is treason. They, like, even
Yes.
with the impeachment situation, they lied about what President Trump at the time had done, claiming that he was the one who had threatened Zelensky to withhold aid and said that he was bullying Zelensky, when there's a video of Joe Biden at the CFR bragging about doing that very thing and then denying it when he gets on the debate stage or claiming, oh, they're just claiming that because I'm their opponent, I'm his opponent, right? We've seen literal treason for 4 years. And for Mitt Romney or anyone else to look at Tulsi and say, I'm advocating, because she's saying I'm advocating for peace, therefore she is treasonous, that is absolutely absurd. I'm not surprised, because that's how they try to paint all of us, right, George? I mean, if you try to tell the truth, then you must be a propagandist, right? So I'm not surprised. But for them to do this to a veteran who is currently still in the military, who had a top secret clearance while she was in Congress, who's clear, you have to go through it's a hellacious process to get top secret clearance, okay? I would know because I used to have one. And for her to go through all that, and for them to have put in no service to this country, to look at someone who has and is very prideful about that service and claim that a colonel in the military is a traitor, you need to resign. And I 100% agree with Tulsi Gabbard on that front. Mitt Romney needs to apologize and resign. And if he does not provide any proof of what he is claiming, then I think she should sue him for slander.
Me too. It's harder in the US to do that than it is in some countries, of course. But I would have thought it was an open and shut case, and one that the crowd would be happy to fund, because this question of demonization, criminalization of independent minds and dissidents, this is what we are now. You're not old enough to remember, but a dissident was a thing in the Soviet Union, in the Eastern Bloc. We all used to love dissidents here in the West. Now we've become the dissidents. We're the ones that are being suppressed.
Do you remember the Ice Cube situation, George, where Ice Cube came out and said that he wasn't going to support either party because neither of them actually seemed to actually support Black people? You remember how he was being attacked maliciously, lied upon, everything under the sun because he wouldn't support either party. So they said that he was a Trump supporter. Lil Wayne, another rapper, very popular guy, came out and explicitly supported Trump. Probably Lil Wayne, for all intents and purposes, is more popular than Ice Cube is. But guess what? He chose a side. So the attacks on Lil Wayne were few and far between and lasted for like 4 hours. Because Ice Cube was independent-minded, and of course, a Black man being independent-minded, saying that the Black people should not trust either party until they show a concrete plan for how they're going to help us. He was attacked for days up until the election. And now, of course, he's been proven right, but that just goes to prove your point. It's the independent-minded that they don't like. If you choose a side, well, they can always, the theater encourages you to choose a side. You can work with that. But those who are willing to call out both sides and also give credit where credit is due, those tend to be seen as the most dangerous.
Lastly, Niko, and I'm grateful for your time, and speaking of dangerous rhetoric, just in the last 10 minutes, Joe Biden has described Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. That is one president calling another president a war criminal. And the Russian response is that this is unforgivable rhetoric. And one thing I know about Russians is when they say something, they mean it. When they say something is a red line, it is a red line. When they say that something is unforgivable, it will not be forgiven. So this means we're now locked into, not just for the course, the duration of these hostilities, which I pray will be mercifully short, but we are now locked into, as long as Biden and Putin are alive and in office, a virtual state of war between Russia and the United States, even if it hasn't come to direct shooting yet.
At the very least, a new Cold War.
Very, very, very dangerous moment, isn't it?
Yeah, at the very least, a new Cold War, which actually Tulsi had been trying to warn about her entire campaign, ironically enough, right? Something I've been warning about. But the audacity, the living, unmitigated audacity for Joe Biden to call anybody a war criminal when we literally droned innocent civilians in Afghanistan not even months ago and admitted to it. We've been bombing Somalia on and off for the last year, and we don't even know the real reason why we've been doing so. That's not just us. That's all of NATO. All of the major NATO powers have been involved in this. We've been funding literal Nazis, not just this year, but at least since 2014, bare minimum, okay? We killed more innocent people in Afghanistan than the terror, like us in this, the Afghan army that we were training, than the actual terrorists did. And we also obviously killed more innocent people than we actually killed terrorists while we were there, right? There is, I mean, to compare Putin, I don't know Putin personally. I don't know if he's a good or a bad guy. I can only compare policy to policy because these are the two countries that are going at it. Putin was invited to Syria to help reconcile the situation with the terrorists, the ISIS terrorists that we put there. Every time we go back, ISIS shows up. Every time Putin shows up and him and Assad work together, ISIS is gone. Speaking from a Black perspective, Russia and Putin were not responsible for the deaths of multiple Black liberators. Putin isn't running Guantanamo Bay right now, okay? Putin doesn't have, what is it, 700 bases in over 80 countries around the world? Putin isn't responsible for invading Vietnam. He isn't responsible for balkanizing Korea. He isn't responsible for, I mean, he really isn't. It's the list of egregious offensive. He isn't responsible for siege warfare against Venezuela or Cuba, or responsible for overthrowing a government in Bolivia. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But the moment that he decides to defend his country, we call him a war criminal because that's right out of the regime change playbook. We did the same thing right to Gaddafi right before we assassinated him. We tried to do the same thing to Assad. We did the same thing to Maduro. We always claim when a country has to defend itself against NATO powers, when they do defend themselves, that they are war criminals for doing so. Meanwhile, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, looks a lot like the criminal justice system in the US. The people who should be being prosecuted, like Biden, Hillary, even Trump to some degree with the assassination of Soleimani and other things, they're not the ones being prosecuted. The ICC is just a bunch of Black people and brown people who are getting thrown to the bus by the United States, who are being tried instead, so that the real criminals never really get held accountable.
Niko House, you're a star. Thanks for shining on us tonight on the mother of all talk shows. I appreciate it very much indeed. Let me take a short break, yeah? No, I'm going to a call. I'm sorry, I've got a call. It's Tim in Dorset. Go ahead, Tim.
Hello?
Yes,
Hi.
You're on the air, brother.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a bit off topic, but I'm wondering whether, insofar as you are the sole arbiter of your party's policies, you'll be considering promoting direct democracy. It seems
let me stop you there. Yeah. I'm not remotely the sole arbiter of my party's policies, and it's very insulting of you to say so. What evidence do you have to make that allegation?
What allegation?
That I'm the sole arbiter of my party's policies.
I didn't say you were. I said insofar. I mean, you know, speaking as an individual. Then, are you interested in promoting direct democracy?
Yeah, I am, but not in the cultish way that some of the campaigners at UK Democracy are. I'm having difficulty with my earpiece, so Forgive me, Tim. We'll talk about direct democracy another night, shall we? Gobarwala says, the UK giving Venezuela's gold to Juan Guaido and the US confiscating Afghanistan and Russia's central bank reserves is going to put a dagger in the dollar. Goodbye to further investments in London and Washington. And Old On says the EU is not allowing Ukraine to join because they don't respect minorities. It's one of the checklist to get in the EU. And Maxwell Kim says this incident creates a bad precedent, especially with the issue with Venezuelan gold being confiscated. This will drive the Venezuelan regime in the near future to hold British citizens hostage. And Robert Stan says Italian harbor workers have discovered hidden weapons in so-called Western humanitarian aid to Ukraine. I'd like to hear more about that. But GH takes the biscuit tonight. If George likes Russia so much, why doesn't he live in the motherland? Well, GH, let me tell you that for decades in my life, half-wits like you used to shout, "Go back to Russia." That's when Russia was a communist country. And then it became a capitalist country, and it wasn't really a sensible thing to say to me. So some people, especially in some parts of Scotland, would shout, "Go back to Ireland, the famine is over." But mate, I was born and will die here in Britain. I'm the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. I love Britain. I love our language, our culture. I love our people. I want to defend our people. I want to extend the rights of our people. I want to improve the lives of our people. When your default position is that anybody who disagrees with you should get out of the country, you're seriously deficient in your logical thinking. It is a very stupid thing to do. Okay, Richard is in Canada. Let's hear from him. Go on, Richard.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. A few technical gremlins this evening, but that's got to be expected in wartime. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'd like to speak about my opposition to what the war in Ukraine is transpiring to be. I was in the Yugoslav war as a peacekeeper, and the area I was in Krajina had 200,000 Serbs, got reduced to 3,000. It's genocide. I believe that this war is Slavic against Slavic, and I'm a very pro-Slavia person. Like I say, I'm a peacekeeper, and yeah, it's deteriorating my health just thinking about what my country is supplying, thinking about the Azov battalion, thinking about the persecution of refugees trying to flee to places like India, Bangladesh, countries in Africa, how they were denied access. And yeah, it's just, I believe this is a new world order war. I don't trust any of the politicians, and I'm just praying for peace. And I'm hoping one day all the Slavic nations will unite. And I'm hoping that things like this and COVID would suffice to do that. But yeah, these are difficult times. So
they are, and
yeah,
it's a very moving
call.
It's a moving call, Richard, and I thank you for it. It is, of course, proximately Slav against Slav, but it doesn't take 5 minutes of research to see that the Slavs on the Ukrainian side are being used by non-Slavic powers as a cat's paw, as a spear against the Russians. This is not really a war between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine has been pushed into this war by NATO, which I really mean to say the United States. Of course, there are satrapies like Canada, like the United Kingdom, and others that are effectively auxiliaries of the American armed force. Although it was not always thus. Britain refused to join the Vietnam War, for example. Canada refused to join the Iraq War. It was not always thus, but it clearly is now. There are centers of European resistance. I would say particularly in France. If I were running for president of France, this would be my policy. Withdrawal from the military command of NATO, just like General de Gaulle did. A disengagement from the American hegemony, because we saw with the AUKUS deal, the submarine deal, just exactly what the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia really think of France. Disengagement from US hegemony. I'd point my rockets, my nuclear rockets, in both directions, east and west. And I'd get on board the Eurasian Express. That's actually the best policy for France to follow. And I believe, knowing what I do of the French public, that that could be a very powerful and popular set of policies that one could run for President of France. Richard, thanks for that call in Canada. Some social media, please, while I wait for my next call. GH, I've dealt with. Jerry Corrigan says, it's a complete mystery why George still lives in the UK. Apart from, he hates everything about the Western world, apart from his detestable football club, Manchester United, and Glasgow Celtic. In fact, and Chelsea, and Stoke City, and Accrington Stanley, and Shakespeare, and Dickens, and Wordsworth, and Burns, and Enid Blyton, and the English language, and Shakespeare, and its culture, and its music, and the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones, and the rolling hills, and the mountains, and the rivers, and the brooks, and the bonny heather outside my window, and the daffodils, newly sprung in spring. What's wrong with you, man? I want to make Britain better. Why don't you consult the Workers' Party of Britain 10-point program? You will see there that we have no imaginary country that we can live in. We don't want to be in Russia or in China or even in Cuba. We don't want to be in Australasia or in Chile or even in the Bahamas. We're stuck here in Britain. Clowns to the left of us, jokers to the right, stuck in the middle with you, you half-wit. Let me take a break.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Time, weather,
Let's play a game and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
Yo, Mikey, what's happening?
Joey, the usual?
Sure.
You looking fresh, man. You get a new haircut?
Nah, brother. I just got that, scholarship from the College of Knowledge.
Oh, you got into the University of the Airwaves?
Sure did, brother. I got knowledge coming out of my ears. GG, man. He knows what's up.
I knew there was something new about you. Yo, reckon he'd take me?
Everyone is welcome, brother. Even from Jersey.
Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
We need to acclimatise the public for the introduction of extraterrestrials, because, come to the conclusion at this point, if they're going to come, they are going to come soon.
Back in the late 60s and early 70s, they actually saw the saucer land in front of them or pass by in New York or go overhead.
It went in front of my eyes up and turned into what looked like a star way up in the sky.
They said the same line that you just made, and it was amazing. It is an awful waste of space if we are all that there is.
If we're all that there is. Exactly. Have you ever seen any of these phenomena?
I have seen energy entities. One looked like a massive jellyfish. The other one looked like a massive centipede.
Well, you had me up to that point. Now I just think you're stark raving mad.
Our world is full of mysteries. The lost city of Atlantis. Area 51. Who killed JFK?
It's a conspiracy, man. We have a right to know.
Shut it, you nutter.
The senseless made sensible. Only on the mother of all talk shows.
Global higher education with one of the world's best known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Well, that Liverpool show is sold out, but you can still get tickets for the Oxford Town Hall next month. Do please get them, though, because they're beginning to go quickly now. Let's go to, is it Raja in Toronto? Yes. Go on, Raja.
Yes. Yes, George. It's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to pick your brain, if my analysis is correct or on the right path. So, I'm working on the concept of the puppet and the puppet master. So, in United States, the president and the vice president traditionally are the dummies or the puppets. Now, the question is, who is the puppet master? Now, Victoria Nuland is Jewish. Anthony Blinken is Jewish, Zelensky and the Prime Minister. So what I'm alluding to is, are these the people who have hijacked power in the United States and the Western countries? And they are the
No, well, some of the most outstanding opponents of NATO and the United States hegemony are also Jewish. So that would be a foolish...
That's true.
Racial
it's not
stereotype.
Black and white.
No, well, let me develop my point. Some of my comrades, like Max Blumenthal, for example, could not be more pungent critics of all of this. I don't know if Anthony Blinken is Jewish, as it happens. I know famously that Zelensky is, but I also know he's presiding over an army which has a significant detachment of Nazis in it. So it seems to me that the religion of the people involved is completely immaterial, and that going off looking for Jews under bushes is precisely the kind of thing that Bandera and his Jew killers in the Second World War did. So I find it distasteful, your call, Raja, and so I'm going to discontinue it. I'll go now to the polls where we have a very clear result. Should the UK have paid Iran the £400 million it owed 6 years ago in order to free Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe? And it's comprehensive. Yes, 68 on Twitter. Yes, 67 on YouTube. Yes, 74 on Telegram. But you can still vote. That poll will run right up to the end of the night. Let's go to Italy and talk with Daniel. Go ahead, Daniel, in Italy.
Hi, George. Glad to be on your show. I want to talk about the incident that you talked about earlier, about the weapons that were found on the supposed humanitarian aid
please,
plane to Ukraine.
yeah, please, because I didn't know about that. Go on. Tell me what happened.
So I read this story a couple of days ago on the website of the USB, which is the Union of General Association in Italy. It said that workers at the Pisa airport found weapons which were disguised as humanitarian aid for Ukraine. And the workers, when they saw the weapons, actually refused to load the plane. And they will also be on strike on the 19th of March for this very reason. And they demand the air traffic control structures of the civil airport to immediately block these flights of death disguised as humanitarian aid, and workers to continue to refuse to load weapons and explosives that feed a spiral of war.
Daniel, that is fascinating information. Can you enlighten us what kind of weapons they were and where they had come from?
I'm afraid this was not discussed in the release, the press release by the USB, this Association of Unions. But yeah, I'm sure that there's some workers who know very well what kind of weapons were.
Yeah, well, if you can be our Italian correspondent and try and get further and better particulars, I'd love to hear more on Sunday night's Moats, if you do get any more information. But let me ask you generally, because we are all familiar with public opinion in Britain and in the United States, to a slightly lesser extent in France and in Germany for that matter. But what's the attitude of the government, the parliament, the political parties, and above all the public in Italy to this NATO war, this NATO provocation against Russia?
Well, as far as I saw, the politics is very united in support of Ukraine, but the public is very, very split into different opinions. Many, as I think that this war should have been avoided by all means. That maybe Putin went too far by invading Ukraine, but many people do realize that there was an immediate threat on Russia. This is the feeling I get from my friends, from the people I work with.
And what about the media, Daniel? Is there any chink any chink of a different point of view?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. They all support Ukraine. They all support. They all say that Putin is the new Hitler. There are some dissenting voices every once in a while on public television, but that's very rare, and they're very rapidly shut up.
And what about the old Communist Party, once a power in the land? Have they got anything to say?
They've got something to say, but they've got very little following to this day. Maybe in the future things will be better, but I still don't know that.
Okay, look, that's terrific. If you can get any further and better on the airport incident, the Pisa humanitarian flight that turned out to be a weapons shipment, I'd very much like to hear from you on Sunday. Daniel, thanks very much for the call. Some social media. Ronald Lewis says, yes, it's true, George. America destabilized another country. Now we're trying to cover it up. Notice that Obama is silent. He orchestrated the original regime change in Ukraine. Let's go to New York and hear from Richard. Richard in New York, welcome to the show.
Hey, George, big fan. Listen, George.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, back in the day, back in the early 2000s, I looked at you. I knew the Iraq War was terrible. I remember that night when the bombs were hitting Iraq. And I was saying to myself, why in the hell is my government doing this? And I remember you were against it, and everybody, American media was constantly attacking you, calling you a communist.
Yeah.
And I said to myself,
a traitor, everything. There's nothing they didn't call me.
Right, and as the time has gone on, George Galloway has proved everyone wrong. What has the United States done to the Middle East to stabilize the whole Middle East? How many millions of people have died because of those pathetic wars? I feel sick to my stomach. And another thing is I try to talk to the average person about Russia, try to explain to them, Ukraine is pretty much Russia. I hate to break it to you. I mean, you go back to the Kievan Rus. The Kievan Rus, the origin of it 1,000 years ago was in Russia. Okay, the Russia evolved through Ukraine. You know, what is the top Russian dish? Chicken Kiev. The Russian ballet comes out of Ukraine. The Russian Orthodox Church comes out of Ukraine. I mean, if you look at a map of Europe in the 1800s, and because we had the Ottoman Empire coming up, but predominantly most of Ukraine is inside Russia. If you look at the map of the 1900, the year 1900, majority of Ukraine is in Russia. I can't
and the rest of it, most of the rest of it is in Poland.
Right. So I as an American,
well,
I'm concerned about.
I'll tell you what. Yeah, I'll tell you what, Richard. They all laughed. All these ignoramuses, these Philistines. They all laughed at Putin's so-called rambling speech, which called into question his sanity and so on. But if you read the document that I referred to earlier, produced not by Putin, but by his main adversaries in Russia, the Russian Communist Party, you'll see that everything that Putin said about Ukraine was the truth. Now, you might not like the truth. You might not like the fact that Ukraine always was divided between, even the words the Ukraine means the borderland of the Russias. And the people that live in the eastern part were Russian people. The Queen Mother in the time of the Romanovs, after the death of the Tsar, the assumption to power of Nicholas, she went to her palace in Kiev. The Queen Mother of Russia lived in Kiev. And the western part of Ukraine was seized by Poland. And then when the Nazis invaded, the Soviet Union was overrun right up to the gates of Moscow and Leningrad, and the Ukrainian nationalists sided with the Nazis and started to murder Poles, Jews and non-Jews in massive numbers. It was, as Putin said, it was only the Soviet Union, only, which gave Ukraine, with its current borders, an existence. That existence was not there before. Now, that's not to say, because I'm not a believer in ancient history being the guide to where we should be today or what we should do today. Obviously, you're a fool if you don't know it or try to know it. But that doesn't mean that the Ukraine should now be wiped off the map. I'm not in favor of that. I was in favor of the Minsk Agreement, which would have left even the Donbass inside the territory of Ukraine, but with autonomy. But that Minsk Agreement was not only never implemented by Kiev, the Western governments encouraged them not to implement it. Last word to you, Rich.
Yeah, and another thing, if you're 100% completely correct, as always, George, another thing is, after the fall of the Soviet Union, which I know the Russians were hurt when that happened, and they went through a rough time with Yeltsin, and there were a lot of gangsters who got in Russia at the time in the 90s. And Putin came in there, and he straightened everything out. And I was thinking as America, I said, you know what? We can be friends with Russia. We can help Russia. We can help Russia rebuild itself. And like a regular American, this is what I truly felt and I wanted to do. But the government here didn't really have those kind of plans for Russia, did they? They kind of wanted to bring the American industry in and pretty much kind of abuse Russia. And they constantly never let Russia forget that they lost the Cold War, and they kept, pushing NATO further east. I mean, I think these people who rule our country are maniacs, George. They're absolutely out of their minds.
Well, when I look at Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, and to a slightly lesser extent, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, I ask myself, is this the best that the Anglosphere can produce as their political leaders? If it is, then by jolly, we are doomed. Richard, it's been a pleasure talking to you, I must say. Now, 4,700 people have voted on the poll. Again, it's still pretty overwhelming. Can I squeeze in John in Suffolk? John in Suffolk, welcome to the show.
Hi, George.
Hi, mate. Go ahead, sir.
Right. Do you remember those protests that happened about the Iraq invasion in London?
Do I? Do I? You ask me. I led them.
Pretty big protests, right?
Yeah.
Biggest in history, right?
Yep.
I'm
losing this call. So, John, we'll try and get back to you after the break. Coming up in the next hour of the show, I'm talking to the wonderful EJMagnier on NATO and Europe, because he's based there, on how European public opinion and political opinion is going. And then later, TikTok censorship. Is TikTok censored too? With the one and only Alex Rubenstein. I'll be back after the break.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland. Even the European, which he then owned. All over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
Millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy, I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know. Who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God! This goes higher up than we thought!
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've got
go
a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. 02077 982 255 is the number if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480, or tweet me, of course.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
EJMagnier is up next from the heart of Europe, one of Europe's most sensible and coruscating correspondents, analysts, and commentators. I met him for our Sputnik show just the other day, and he was so good, I had to have him on again, and I'm glad to say he accepted my invitation. Elijah, welcome to the mother of all talk shows, Extra. I want to ask you something as one European to another. They keep saying that, well, this is different. These are not Africans, Arabs, Asians that are being bombed. These are civilized tribes from Europe that are being bombed, and therefore all norms of refugee hatred and repel all borders have to be dropped. In fact, in Britain, you're being given a very substantial amount of money, if you gross it up over the year, to take in a Ukrainian. Not something that was ever done for Syrian refugees or Afghan refugees, or even for homeless British servicemen living on the streets. But I wonder if these people are so young or so foolish that they don't remember Yugoslavia.
Hello, George, and I'm really honored to be on your show. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
I think the world has a very short memory, and the difference is what kind of war we are facing today. Apart from the discrimination that is disgraceful, but the war that we have seen throughout the last 2 decades, it's a war that the West has triggered. We have done this war. We went to Afghanistan, we went to Iraq, we went to Syria, and we have created this havoc to the point that people are so much uninformed that when they talk to me, they say, well, is it the problem that people in the Middle East don't want democracy? Is it a problem that in Yugoslavia, Europe is incapable of sorting out its own problem? So the misinformation and the disinformation that is horrendous, particularly in the war in Ukraine today, is turning people to swallow everything, including journalists who are saying, well, we're dealing with white people with blue eyes. They forget that they have exactly the same blood color, and they are facing even worse. We faced even worse crisis around the world, and we're still facing it in Yemen. We're still facing it in Syria. The bombing in Yemen has been going on for the last 7 years, and there are 20 million people who are starving, 12 million children. Look at the United Nations figures. They are really scary. And people talk about Ukraine because it is not our war. It is the war between the US and Russia. It is the war that US is pushing everybody in Europe behind it, or pushing it ahead of it, and saying, well, we need to fight the evil Russian, and you don't need to mention that the problem is our control, our hegemony, and that we have been trying to create this problem in Ukraine since 1997, and then we increased it in 2004 with the Orange Revolution in 2014. And then we have this war today. People don't know that the Ukrainian army was 120,000 only in 2014. And between 2014 to 2021, the Ukrainian economy was on the floor, yet the army increased to 350,000 men. The economy, the budget to the army was 1%. Today, it's 7%. Hundreds of millions of dollars are sent to Ukraine today, not in form of humanitarian aid, but in form of weapons to go and kill themselves and to go and fight Russia with one objective, is to make sure that this war is going to last as long as possible.
That was quite brilliantly expressed and educated me, and I thought I knew it all. I didn't know these Ukrainian army figures or the budget increase from 1% to 7%. That's quite stunning, actually, at a time when actually Ukraine's main export is its own people. The economy depends on the remittances of millions of Ukrainians who've had to leave their country because of the dire economic situation. Ukraine in the Soviet times was a very successful economy. All kinds of industries were developed in that period, now all lost, closed. The only industrial capacity Ukraine has now is in the east of the country, in the ethnically Russian areas. Now, I think, gone forever from Ukraine. So millions of Ukrainians are living abroad because there's no work for them, while all this money is being spent on an army and all this tax is being raised for an army. And it's quite clear what its purpose is. This is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. The United States doesn't have the guts to fight Russia itself. Otherwise, it would already be in there. But it wants to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. But here's the point, Elijah. In this proxy war, the Europeans are going to be the big losers. Why has the European political class and the public gone so quiescently into this good night?
Well, that's a very good question, George. First of all, we think we are independent, we have independency, and we think we have a democracy. Domestically, yes, we do have that. Internationally, we don't, because the Montreux Agreement in 1823 gives the right for the Americans to impose on Europe a policy that is not incompatible with the interests of the United States. And if we look at what's happening in the last only few weeks, the number of US soldiers has increased from 70,000 to 100,000. We have dozens of US military bases in Europe. What for? Why do we need in Europe nuclear weapons? Well, the answer is very obvious. We need to be in Europe the avant-garde of the Americans, so the Americans can bomb Russia in case of nuclear war, so the bombs fall rapidly on Russia if they are sent from the European continent and not from the United States. So that doesn't allow Russia to respond in case of nuclear war. So the whole objective is focused from the American side on how we are going to behave in case of nuclear war with Russia, and not how we're going to build the economy in the world and allow everybody to live comfortably or not under poverty level. Therefore, what we see in Europe, we see an increase of number of US troops, we see an increase of number of nuclear bombs, and we see the hostility that is the American pushing the Europeans ahead of them and asking the European to invest their budget, not domestically, but to support the armament of Ukraine. And everybody is saying it is only a question of time that Russia end this war in Ukraine and impose its conditions. So basically what we are doing today is saying exactly what you just said. We want more Ukrainian killed just to be able to continue our media campaign around the world to say how bad are the Russians. It is exactly the same scenario, and I would like to quote it here. The president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, who was asked to hold on for 6 months and to fight the Taliban because it was trained by the Americans for this purpose, which means the Americans wanted the president of Afghanistan to kill more Afghani for 6 months and after that decapitulate. This is exactly what they are asking from President Zelensky today, to receive more weapons that the Americans have been training Ukrainian to use since 2014, 2015 for this exact day, so they can hold a few extra months before they surrender. So if we know the result, why are we having more refugees? Why are we sending hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons? Why are we asking the Ukrainians to kill themselves? And why we are missing up on the entire economy of the planet? We pay additional prices on food, on transport, on everything. And we also see population like Ukrainian suffering because of war again in Europe.
Again, a brilliant exposition. I had some hopes that Germany might resist, not least because of its history, but also because of its geography, because of its economic dependence on Russian energy, and because of the market which Russia represents for German industry, particularly at the luxury end, German cars and so on. And maybe if Mrs. Merkel had still been in, that would have happened. But the Social Democrats and the Greens, true to form, true to 1914, have quickly capitulated to the empire. And therefore, I have some hope only in France. What can you tell me about the state of French public opinion in a presidential election year?
Well, I'm going to go very quickly to Germany, and then I will move to France. Germany, if the world needs to know, your audience needs to know, that the suspension of the gas line from Russia to Europe through Germany, that is called Nord Stream 2, that had never been inaugurated, but was ready to pump gas, it was suspended by an announcement of President Joe Biden from Washington. Yes. This is not a European will to do what they think is the best for their own European population. And what France did in 1966, General de Gaulle, he asked all the Americans to leave and closed all the US NATO bases in France. Now, the president, Emmanuel Macron, tried to do that in 2018 when he said France needs a European army to defend itself, including from the United States, because he saw what President Donald Trump, how President Donald Trump tried to bully Europe and to blackmail the European states. And in 2022, just a couple of weeks ago, President Macron said exactly the same thing. Now, the Americans responded by increasing the number of US troops in Europe and saying, you have NATO. Why do you need a European army? Why do you need to defend yourself against the United States? And what the Americans did is they rallied everybody in the world behind them, with them against Russia. So nobody dares to say, well, the problem is because you Americans, in 1990, you promised the Russians that you will not expand NATO by a document that you, the US National Security Archive, released James Baker told President Gorbachev that the US will not expand NATO beyond the Soviet Union. Warren Christopher, United States Secretary of State, again in 1993, promised Boris Yeltsin exactly the same. 1997, this is when the new demand of NATO were accepted, and the Americans knew that this is going to create one day a problem, particularly in Ukraine. So they form a new army. They train this army. They equip this army with Western weapons so they can fight Russia. That is behind the conflict. We are doing a war that we have nothing to do with.
EJMagnier, it's always a pleasure, an honor to talk with you. Thanks for coming on the Mother of All Talk Shows Extra. Let me get some more social media. Cancelling Dostoevsky is surreally ironic, given he was jailed by the Tsar for writing banned books. And James Graham says, Clydebank was blitzed by the Luftwaffe in World War II. Now I'm surrounded by NATO Nazi lovers. James, that is very powerful indeed. And of course, the blitz on Clydebank will never be, should never be forgotten. But it appears that it has been by the Scottish political class. And Green Grugach says, blessings from Derry, Mr. Galloway. My uncle, John Hume, God rest his soul, Nobel Peace Prize winner when it meant something, thought very highly of you. Would like to speak to you, cannot get through, need to hear this. Let's try and get back to Green. Any nephew of the late and great John Hume is worth hearing from. And John Roberts says, am I correct in saying that British law was changed in response to Dr. David Kelly's death? That is what is changed, so that any independent autopsy must reach the same conclusion as the official one. Well, not quite. I'll explain it all at Oxford Town Hall next month, John. But if you can't be there, download my film, Killing Kelly. Let me go to Spain. I've got so much social media, but let me take some more calls. Let me go to John in Spain. Go ahead, John.
Hello, George. Very good evening to you.
And you. Thanks for calling.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, there's one point, a couple of things. I don't have got time to raise them all. Obviously, you've got other guests. One in particular, first of all, the awful atrocity that took place in Donetsk a couple of days ago. That's, to my knowledge, been totally missed by virtually all mainstream media. I don't think it's actually had any report whatsoever. There is video that I saw.
You're right. You're right, John. It hasn't appeared anywhere with any kind of salience, yet it was a massacre of 20 civilians in Donetsk by the Western armed, financed, and shilled for Ukrainian armed forces. Therefore, it never happened.
It is shocking. And regrettably, it's a segue to my main point. I actually saw a video of that attack today. It is available from a private reporter that's on the ground. It's shocking. Anyone who does go to look at it, obviously we have to be armed for the facts, but it was very upsetting. But it is a segue. I
couldn't watch it. I had to switch off.
I literally had to. I totally empathise. But it actually segues into what I was going to say in a larger context, really, George. And that is, I'm sure many of the listeners will be familiar that the last 2 years, we've had this narrative of COVID obviously repeated again and again and again to the mainstream media. We've been propagandized. We know we've had the 77th Brigade in the United Kingdom obviously working very actively in social media, in shaping people's thoughts. This is not a conspiracy, it's a fact, it's openly admitted. And in fact, most recently, a very renowned psychologist in Belgium published a peer-reviewed paper. His name is Dr. Matthias Desmet, where he asserts that what's happened in the last 2 years through mainstream media is a mass formation psychosis. And this has been supported by, you probably are familiar with this, I'm sure, as are perhaps many of your listeners, I should say. But with what is occurring right now, when I see people responding to the mainstream media, certainly with the Ukraine affair, it's almost as if there's been this seamless transition whereby perhaps in my thinking is they've had all of their frustrations over the COVID period have all been now pented and are being thrust upon Russia and thrust upon this scenario that let's go get the bad guy, where they will abandon all rationality because they're being stoked, obviously, by our furious Western media, you know, the NATO side of things that were all, which I find abhorrent. I think many people do. And it's like, this is now, look over here now. This is where you can focus and channel your anger. Because I literally see people that I think, hang on a minute, surely you can see there's two sides to what is going on here. They are not prepared, most people, to even consider Russia's side of what is going on here, which, of course, makes any possibility of having any reasoned debate impossible. It's a sad
I think that's a brilliant call, and I would like to see that research. If you could kindly get it to me, John, or get me the link, I mean. But I think you're bang on the money. I do think this is psychosis, and I think it is intimately connected to the 2 years or more of the COVID crisis that we have been through. And that's why I say it's close to mental illness. It has been seamless. We have taken off our masks and put on our gas masks, put on our tin helmets. The enemy has gone from being an unseen virus to Russia. People have lost grip, lost touch with reality. It's quite evident in the crowd behavior that we have seen. Even in the town that we live in, as far from Ukraine and from big political events as it's possible to imagine, Ukrainian flags have sprouted in shops and cafes and so on in a way that simply never happened during the Yugoslav war, the Iraq war, the Afghan war, the Syrian war, the Libyan war, the Yemen war. Inconceivable that it would have happened over those, but it has happened over this. The crowd mentality that is on display, Pavlovian mentality. But, and here's the good news, I have the distinct, though still anecdotal, impression that opinion has begun to change. First of all, we are cutting through, no doubt, about the Nazi character of a substantial part of the Ukrainian armed forces. We are reminding people of something they had perhaps intentionally forgotten, which was the role of the Ukrainian nationalists during the Holocaust and the Second World War. We are turning the corner on the nature of American leadership, the madness of not King George, but King Joe, the madness of Nancy Pelosi, the madness of being led by the nose by such people. And above all, because it's the economy stupid, as Bill Clinton once said, people are looking up at the signs with the petrol prices on them and shuddering. I am myself shuddering, and I'm not a poor man. If I were, I wouldn't be able to drive a car. And the inexorable rise of food prices and other prices is going to change a lot of people's minds. Let's go to Ray in Wales. Go ahead, Ray.
George, nice to speak to you. I love the show.
Go ahead.
Fantastic. I just wanted to let you know that how astonishing that I find it that Ukrainian refugees seem to now be worth more than those from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and that when armed resistance in a place like Palestine occurs and happens, they're referred to as terrorists. And yet now we are now funding,
and you go to prison, Ray, you would go to prison in Wales, in England and in Scotland if you raised the banner of support for that armed resistance to foreign occupation of their land, whilst we're sending mercenaries to go and fight in the Ukraine. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the fact that we are now sending weapons, and I too have heard a story of relief convoys actually carrying covert arms. I mean, this is a story which is emerging. The fact that we are now supplying arms to right-wing fascist neo-Nazi militia in the Ukraine is something that, frankly, I am appalled with. And I'm ashamed that, as you eloquently have said from the start of this, that Johnson and Starmer are two cheeks of the same backside. It's appalling. So keep up the good work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray. Most kind and eloquent. Now, don't forget my Oxford gig, will you? It's quite a big hall to fill, but it's rapidly filling. It's the Oxford Town Hall. Some of my best speeches, if I may say so, have been given in the Oxford Town Hall, 2 of them at least. And I'm back again, and I'm talking about this death of the British arms expert, arms inspector, Dr. David Kelly. Now, you may think that has been overtaken by events, but I promise you it has not, because this film illuminates the darkest corners of the British state in a way which makes it easier to see what's going on now between the British state, the United States, and the situation in Ukraine. Now, I've had many of my good friends on the show tonight. I've not yet met Alex Rubenstein, but I'm a big admirer of his work. I follow him on social media. I read what he writes, and he really is something. Alex Rubenstein joins us now on the issue of censorship. Alex, thanks for doing that. I think it is important that people realize the lengths and the extent, the depths that this censorship has now reached. It's not just that quite well-known people are being, like Asa Winstanley, for example, on this side of the pond, who are literally being excised from Twitter, even though they could not be more respectable dissidents than Asa Winstanley, with a huge following and great interest in what he has to say. But it's even now reached TikTok. Tell us.
Yeah, well, I want to say that it's an anathema to what democracy is supposed to stand for the state-funded outlets of a party to a conflict to be universally banned from broadcast in the countries that it's in conflict with, right? So, I mean, we're in a situation right now where the West is at war with Russia, using Ukraine and using foreign fighters as proxies, and banning all messaging from the Russian side from reaching their domestic audience, from reaching those foreign audiences. And I just want to say that straight out, it's an anathema to what democracy is supposed to be. At the same time that Russia, that RT has been banned from Telegram, banned from YouTube, you can easily find neo-Nazi groups like the Azov Battalion still operating on Telegram. C-14, a neo-Nazi gang in Ukraine, their leader Yevhen Kadas, he's still on Telegram. This is a guy who has not only met with President Zelensky, but leads an organization which has carried out pogroms against Romani camps in Ukraine. And you can, I mean, all kinds of neo-Nazi groups, you can find them on YouTube, on Telegram today as they continue to fight against Russia and broadcast themselves on the front lines. At the same time, Russia's state media outlet has been banned from these platforms. So it just shows you how desperate the West and its aligned social media companies are to control the narrative. At the same time that these groups are banned, you can go to Twitter. And for the past 2 weeks, Twitter has had in its trending section a post from an outlet called First Draft News. This post is supposedly supposed to teach people how to identify misinformation coming from the war in Ukraine. First Draft News is funded by not only Pierre Omidyar and George Soros, but the Ford Foundation. So it's funded by the same people who have been attempting to destabilize Eastern Europe with their money since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So not only are social media companies censoring alternative viewpoints, but they're artificially amplifying NATO-aligned viewpoints.
It is indeed extraordinary. It's been happening for quite some time. Even the President of the United States was kicked off Twitter. He was the wrong kind of American imperialist, Donald Trump was. But I thought, that TikTok was owned by China, that Telegram was owned by a Russian, not by Russia, but by a Russian. And yet censorship has reached both those platforms, hasn't it?
Yeah, and as you alluded to earlier, the White House brought in a few hundred TikTok influencers, these Zoomers for empire, as I like to call them, to pass on their messaging on the Ukraine war. And basically, I saw at least one of these videos, and it's some pretty young girl who is trying to educate her uneducated audience about how Putin is really the one who's responsible for gas costing $7 down the street.
That's extraordinary, I must say. I don't know how they'll take to it on TikTok. I myself, I'm on TikTok, but I don't do karaoke or dancing or anything on it. But I thought most of the audience was on TikTok for something other than big geopolitical events. Was I wrong?
Well, I mean, I'm a little bit older than the Zoomers, and I have to say I'm not on TikTok, but it seems to me that most of it is, flashy dance videos and video game videos, that kind of thing. Not exactly the audience that you would expect for the White House to want to be persuading on the geopolitics of Eastern Europe. I think it shows the desperation to control the narrative. On top of all the censorship, it shows the desperation, and it speaks to the fact that, frankly, for all the propaganda that we've heard since 2016 when Donald Trump was elected about how Russia's troll farm in St. Petersburg has complete dominance over the narrative in the United States, Ukraine is winning this information war. Russia may be winning on the ground and at least accomplishing the specific goals that it has set out to do. But as far as information goes, this is a victory for Ukraine. And even President Putin today spoke to this issue and reminded Western audiences that they were being lied to about Russia being responsible for the rising oil prices and the other pains inflicted by the financial elite.
Yes, there's no doubt that Vladimir Putin was supposed to control everything. The Russian media was supposedly an existential threat to the Western audiences and the Western way of life, whatever that is. And it's all gone in a whimper, really. No real fight has been put up by the public in your country or mine in defense of free speech, which tends to make you think that this was all just lipstick on a pig in the first place, that our professed belief in free speech, in free assembly, in democracy itself, because, of course, without free speech, you cannot possibly have a democracy. It's an oxymoron. What does that tell you about the state of our people?
Well, I'd like to speak to that question with two examples. One is myself. When I was with RT back in 2017, early 2017, when Donald Trump was being inaugurated, I was arrested while I was reporting on protests against his inauguration. For doing my job, I was arrested, and it was a grueling experience. I spent 25 hours in jail. I was hit multiple times by the police for doing my job with a press badge, with a company jacket on. Now I want to give the example that's more recent of this woman, this news editor in Russia, who invaded the space of an anchor on television and held a sign calling for no war, right? So Western media told us that she was so brave because she did this with the full knowledge that she would be spending the rest of her life in Putin's dungeon being tortured on a daily basis. She was fined about $300 USD, or I think it was 200 euros. So, I mean, it just speaks to – I spent 25 hours in jail, for doing my job and not protesting. So it just speaks to the hypocrisy that's on full display right now. Unfortunately, it's all hidden, right? We get blasted with information about this woman protesting, blasted with information that's false about the ghost of Kiev, about all these different fake news scenarios in Ukraine, and the retraction that comes later is viewed by 1/10 of the audience. So it's a real information war being waged on the minds of Western citizens.
Well, at least we now know how far we've fallen, and therefore how far we've still to go, even to get back to where we were. Alex Rubenstein, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I much appreciated it. Fabrice is in the south of France, where we'd all like to be right now. Fabrice, go on.
Yeah, hi, good evening, George. Great show. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
I'm calling for the second time now. Always
Welcome.
a pleasure. Just 3 points I'd like to make. I'll be brief on each point. First point is I loved RT. I still managed to get them, but all of this censorship thing, it's harder to get them. But I love them. And
Fabrice, I've watched more RT since it was banned than I did when it was available on Sky. Since I got my VPN, I'm absolutely.
Tell us more about how to get that VPN, because it's going to come to that where I'm going to have to get a VPN. But later.
I will do on Sunday. I'm just checking out if it's legal for me to encourage people to get a VPN. I'm waiting for a legal judgment on that.
Yeah, it's important to keep them, because it's not even a Russian perspective. If George Galloway does a show on RT, it's not a Russian point of view. It's George Galloway's point of view. That's
exactly. It's the same point of view, Fabrice, that I had before RT existed. In fact, before the people running RT were even born.
It's the truth, and that is something that Putin said today. The truth is so strong, and that's what where RT is strong. That's what a lot of people don't know.
Amen.
Anyway, when they took that away
on.
from us, the censorship issue, when they took that away from us, and I said, how dare you? These, we saw Borrell and van der Leyen banning RT across Europe. Not that they have the right to do that, but they did that, and that's really where the face of dictatorship showed through. I haven't forgotten Julian Assange, haven't forgotten people being censored left, right, and center. But something directly affecting me, RT, taking that away from RT, amongst other sources, was a real dictatorship feeling, and it was horrible. Second point number 2, when I saw Biden speaking in front of his Senate, whatever it is, his public in the House, whatever the Senate, with Pelosi behind him and Kamala Harris behind him, and when he said we're going to punish Putin, make him and his country pay, and everybody stood up. The 2 women behind him stood up and clapped, and everybody stood up in the let's call it the Parliament, the Senate, stood up and roared. It reminded me of the Third Reich. I really have to say that. It was the only thing they were clapping instead of holding their arms out straight. Point number 3, that's fascism. That's when I saw fascism as well. Point number 3 is very brief. There is a very important difference between Putin and Zelensky. Putin has control over his country. Zelensky doesn't.
Well, that's undoubtedly true. Fabrice, that was a great call, and don't be shy to make it third time lucky. You'll always get through to me, not least because I wish I was in the south of France where you are. The truth is that Putin's ratings are up. There are plenty of people in Russia opposed to what he has done in Ukraine, but the support for Russia taking action in Ukraine to secure its national defense is overwhelming. It's more than 75%. It's all of Putin's supporters, and it's all of the Communist Party, and that together is 75%. And there will be others, indeed, on top of that. The truth is, it's overwhelmingly seen by Russian people as the right thing to have done. In the case of the communists, they criticized Putin for not doing this in 2015. They demanded that Putin recognize the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbass, these then self-proclaimed independent republics, and they demanded Russian military support for these ethnic Russian and Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine back in 2015. So if Putin is being criticized, it's being criticized for having waited far too long, in which 14,000 people in East Ukraine were cruelly murdered. Let's go to Simon in Lincoln. Go ahead, Simon.
Hello, George. Good to see you online.
Welcome, sir. Yeah, thank you, mate. Go ahead.
Well, what it was, George, I don't want to get into too much of an argument, what we can debate, but my position is that NATO is a positive force for the world.
Okay, tell us how.
Tell you how. Well, one thing that we need to get clear is NATO is a defensive coalition. It is not an aggressive coalition. It is a mutual defense agreement.
Why then was it bombing Belgrade and bombing Libya?
Well, in terms of Belgrade, we know the situation there. That Yugoslavia collapsed. It was the ongoing part of that. I think. But the other thing, George, is I'd like to say...
No, don't change the subject, Simon. I asked you, if NATO is a defensive organization, what was it defending in Libya?
Human rights. The same in Serbia. It had to
human rights.
In terms of Libya, they're
so it's not a defense. So you've just acknowledged it's not a defensive organization. It's an organization that will go to war for human rights.
Oh, yes. If it has to, of course, it's armed to the teeth.
All right. One of NATO's members is Turkey. Have you any idea of the human rights crimes committed by Turkey over the last 40 or 50 years that it's been in NATO?
George, every country has a history. We know that. We could go back to the British colonials, or we could go back to Stalin.
You said
if we keep dragging on the past, we're not going to move forward.
Why bring up Stalin and British colonials? We're talking about NATO. Turkey is
currently, yes,
a member.
I do agree that Turkey has.
Turkey, hold on, mate. Turkey is a member of NATO. It invaded and occupied northern Cyprus in 1974. And it still occupies and partitions Cyprus now. What about the human rights of the people in Cyprus?
Yes, but George, being NATO, they are called internal issues, the same as Britain is in Northern Ireland.
Well,
the same as other issues.
If that's an internal
defense agreement.
But how is it an internal issue when one of your members invades another country and partitions it?
Well, we know that Cyprus has always had that problem of the two sides, you know.
Oh, you're really floundering, Simon. You really should have practiced. No, you should have practiced before you took me on this. No, never mind going back 1,000 years. Let's stay in 1974, where NATO, a defensive organization, you say, invaded Cyprus and partitioned it, seized it by military power, and holds it today illegally. So how is that an internal issue? It was an invasion by Turkey of Cyprus.
Well, yes, I would say that you know, Turkey as part of its NATO membership does have a lot of human rights issues to sort out. But in terms of that, George, who's Putin, Belarus? You're telling me Belarus hasn't got human rights?
What's that got to do with it? You're defending NATO. You're defending NATO.
Yes,
so defend it. Defend it. Don't defend it by talking about Stalin or Belarusia. Defend the conduct of NATO. What is it defending? What is it defending when it bombs for 89 days a European capital city in Belgrade?
Well, we know that Serbia had done what they've done. They've caused horrific conflict in the area. They wouldn't let the other countries be independent. You know what I mean?
Simon,
but it wasn't
this
the
is
right
the
war.
purest. Simon, this
George,
is the
I'm not
purest
supporting
defense.
war.
You are supporting war. You're just opposed to some wars, but you're in favor of others. Why did NATO invade Libya?
They didn't invade Libya. They conducted airstrikes and supported different...
So conducting airstrikes isn't an invasion. Conducting an airstrike, actually thousands of them, is not an invasion.
Well, Gaddafi was on the hit list for ages. We knew that, didn't we? He was down on the original neocon hit list. Do you know what I mean? Gaddafi.
Why are you defending that? Why are you defending
and the next
that?
one was attacked.
How can that be defensive, Simon?
Because they was not NATO missions.
But yes, they were.
Other countries
yes,
were involved.
they were. The bombing of Libya was conducted by NATO, by the United States, France, and Britain.
Because it's the same with the 2003 invasion of Iraq, Georgia, which I believe you stood up against that, and you know what I mean. That's why I'll always respect you. At the time, you was one of the only people that stood up against that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you're an intelligent man. But another thing, stop. The 2003 invasion of Iraq was not a NATO mission either. It was an international coalition.
That's why I didn't bring it up. It was illegal under international law, but it was not a NATO mission. But Libya was a NATO mission. And you have yet to say one sentence that would justify the massive bombardment of Libya. Never mind if we talk about its consequences, what's happened since. But the attack on Libya, Obama describes as his big mistake of his presidency. But you're still defending it.
Well, we had Benghazi and all that. Yeah, I defend it because ultimately Gaddafi had been, he had to go. He'd lived a life of luxury, George.
Fair enough. At least you're being honest. Ultimately, he had to go. You're being honest. But you're being honest, Simon, you're being honest, but you have just acknowledged that the last thing that NATO is a defensive organization. Thank you very much for the call. In a minute or so, I'll go to Florida to speak to Daniel, but I just wanted to accentuate a point I made earlier. It is possible that despite a massive following, millions on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and so on, it is possible that I will be removed from those platforms. If you are interested, even if you don't agree with me, if you are interested in my point of view, you need to follow me on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. And if you like this show, and I think you do, more than 1 million of you will watch this edition. Nearly 1.3 million watched last Sunday's edition. If you like this show, the only place that you can guarantee to find it, I hope it doesn't come to that, but the only place that you can guarantee to find it is to follow me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Let's go to Daniel in Florida. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hey, Mr. George. Nice talking to you again.
Good, man. And you, sir?
I went back and watched your video versus the United States Congress, and I just have to give you a hands up for that. That was just a phenomenal show.
Thank you, brother. That was my best day so far.
Yes, I have to agree. You know, they like to sit up high and look down on people and try to intimidate them, and the way you stood up to them was just, it was phenomenal. Yes, sir.
It's hard to intimidate a working class boy from a council house estate in Scotland.
Absolutely.
I tell you. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, drag them down by their tie. But so I just had a theory. Kind of this whole Russophobe, gotta hate Russia thing. So I grew up during the Cold War, in the later stages of it, you know. And it seems like that's kind of been lost on this younger generation. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and you could speak to her about Russians, and she doesn't hate them. She doesn't know much about them, besides some of their funnier videos on the internet. And I think it's got a lot to do with the United States is normally the front seat driver on a lot of world leading stuff. You know, we like to take the lead. We like other people to follow. And I think a lot of Europeans and Americans, both political-wise, are kind of intimidated by Russia. You know, they have such a vast country that has so many resources, and they're their own independent people. They don't need to follow us. It's like going to space. You know, they put the first satellite in space. They put the first man in space who orbited the Earth and was there for 108 minutes. And a month later, the United States follows with probably stolen technology or paid in blood technology from German Nazis we brought here after the war. And he stayed up for 17 minutes. And I think they're intimidated by the fact that there is not only a bigger country with more resources out there, but they're an intelligent people that do not need to follow us. And I think they keep this fear stirred up because I really think the end goal is between Europe and the United States, we would love to break Russia into pieces and separate that pie for ourselves.
That's a beautiful call, Daniel. You're a very clever man, and your analysis is absolutely spot on. The reason they wouldn't let Russia into the EU, the reason they wouldn't let Russia into NATO, the reason they want to Asianize Russia, the reason they want to build an iron curtain between Europe and Russia is for precisely those reasons. Because Russia doesn't take orders, because it has a fighting spirit and capability that can defend itself against anyone, that its prowess in science, in space, and its giganticness and the richness of its resources is truly awesome. All the reasons I love it, actually. Daniel, thanks for that call. There's a legend on the line, so clear the decks. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Honestly, George, there's not enough time, so I can't develop my points very well. So I'll speak to you on Sunday, but I'll just better leave it at the moment. What I will tell you is the nice bit. I've been enjoying the Cheltenham Festival, and my
the racing, yeah, how's it going?
Oh, do you know, my horse at the end, the one it beat, it's running the National twice, and it was an old horse. It was on its last race, and it was just pipped on the post right at the end. But it was a smashing
That's
race.
a pity. That's a pity, and it bust your line. Well, I haven't seen any of Cheltenham. I haven't seen much, actually, because I'm consumed by work at the moment. But I did, of course, see Manchester United's defenestration last evening. And I found it so sickening. It's quite difficult to articulate just how badly I feel about it. So at least your horse was pipped at the post, Norma. Manchester United were left at the gate.
Yeah,
that's
I
all
know.
I can say. I look forward to seeing you. I'll be in Bristol shortly, and I hope to even have a cup of tea with you, but I'll be in touch.
Oh.
The podcast of the show will be out on Friday. The podcasts are going like hotcakes, really. I don't really understand the podcast world. I'd be lying. I don't even understand the TikTok world. I was talking to Alex Rubenstein there as if I knew everything about TikTok. I don't, but I have a clever young wife who knows everything, and she keeps me up to date. This time, 10 years ago, she and I were preparing for our wedding, and I was preparing to win the parliamentary by-election in the Bradford West constituency. 10 years since both those things. More on both on Sunday on the Mother of All Talk Shows. I hope you'll tune in then, Sunday night, 7 p.m.